So greetings, friends and followers. This is Nurses Talking, and I am Dale Barzi. And as always, if you like what you see and hear, subscribe. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Here on Nurses Talking, we speak to nurses anywhere in the world and at any stage in their nursing journey, from students to retirees and anywhere in between. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Rosanne Raso. Dr. Raso is a nurse executive advanced, board certified. She's editor-in-chief of nursing management. She's a thought leader, a healthcare leader, and fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. So welcome.
Thank you, Dale, and thank you for picking me out of all the LinkedIn people you follow to ask me to speak with you today. I'm honored.
It is my great pleasure. I get such a high from talking to nurses. It's amazing. We have so much to say.
Yes, I'm sure that won't be a problem for us to talk.
Not so much to say. But anyway, firstly, why are you a nurse?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I always thought about, was I called into nursing or was I pushed into nursing? Not that it matters as long as you love it, which I do. But honestly, for me, it was not a lifelong quest to become a nurse. I did not have a mom that was a nurse or an aunt that was a nurse. So it wasn't like I lived with nurses and wanted to do that. But I did live a life of service in my church. I was always, in charge of, this committee or that committee, and I just lived a life of service even as a teenager, and I loved math and science. Like that was my jam, math and science. So it was time to apply for college, and I needed to figure this out, and I had to go to a community college. I had no money, I had no guidance, so I knew it had to be a community college, and it had to be a career choice. That's something I could make a living with when I finished. So in looking through options, nursing was clearly one that fit my personality, my love of service. I love to watch Marcus Welby. I don't think that counts, but I was always entranced by medicine. So it was really like having to fill out my community college application that pushed me to nursing. But I think everything that I loved and enjoyed really led to that moment.
Yeah. You kind of gravitate towards somehow. You started by saying you weren't sure if it was a calling or you were pushed, but maybe it was a calling.
I think so.
So what were the biggest challenges for you though? As a student and even working?
Working, I think the challenges for me was I've always been kind of this goal-oriented person. So even starting out as a brand new nurse, I wanted to get to the next level. I would look at the nurses who could handle their patients like this, and I'm like, be one of those nurses. And I had been through a critical care, some clinical rotation, and I saw those nurses, and I was like, oh, I want to be like those critical care nurses. And then I saw the charge nurse who was making decisions and helping people, and I thought, I want to be a charge nurse. So and then when I became a charge nurse, I wanted to go to critical care. And then when I was in critical care, I wanted to be the nurse manager. And then I saw what educators did, and I wanted to be. So I challenged myself, honestly, to always get to the next thing. And that included education. I was an associate degree graduate, and I was a bit of a trailblazer in that I pursued my BSN through what was then called the Regents External Degree Program. So there was no online in 1980. It was tests mailed to your house and sent back.
Yeah.
But we had clinicals where we were observed for specific competencies. And so I got my BSN through that program, which was not even accredited then. It was accredited a year later. I was one of the
Okay.
people that wrote letters that said, this was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. You must accredit this program. I am so much a better nurse because of this program, etc. So honestly, I think that challenges have been my own expectations of myself.
Yeah, and so was most of your function in critical areas, critical care areas?
Yeah, I really wanted critical care and got into critical care about a year into practice and became then I did that for 5 years, and then I became the nurse manager. I did surgical ICU.
Okay.
So I was on the surgical side. And a job it was called head nurse then, opened up in the CCU, in the cardiac care unit. So I ended up getting that job and realizing that surgery and medicine, it's 180 degrees apart. It was completely different
Mm-hmm.
in how your clinical practice worked. In surgical ICU, you know exactly when the patients are going to urinate, when they're going to wake up, when their chest tubes are coming out. Like it's, with
Yeah.
some exceptions, obviously, it was way more predictable. In the CCU, who was going into VFib suddenly and who was going into flash heart failure. And it
Yeah.
was very, very different. So I got an appreciation for the difference between medicine and surgery as a
Yeah.
specialty. But then
Yeah.
I went into education at that point. So I wanted to be an educator. That's my master's was in education. And I was a clinical nurse specialist for CCU. That became cardiac became my real specialty. And I was tapped on the shoulder to become an assistant director of nursing for a critical care department, which wasn't where I planned to go into management. That
Yeah.
was not in the challenges that I imposed on myself. That was not one of them. So, the door opened, I walked through it, and well, I stayed in a formal leadership role for the rest of my career.
Yeah, awesome. So having done all of that, because you started, as an associate degree nurse, and you've done all the critical care and management and leadership and education, all of that kind of thing. What would you like to see change?
Well, I mean, what I would like to see change in nursing in general is the things that have plagued us kind of more recently, which is that you're expected to do overtime, or you're expected to work 12 hours straight without a break, or you're expected to get verbal or even physical abuse from patients and families as part of the job. Like those kinds of things, I would like to see change, and I think it is changing in some organizations, and that's all positive. And there's even some policy changes
Yeah,
to prevent some of that. And then on the other hand, I think sometimes we make too many excuses for care that is substandard. And in nursing, anything but compassionate care should just not be allowed. It should just not
yeah,
be allowed.
yeah.
And I think we excuse too much sometimes. So I'd like to see that changed.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I actually hadn't thought of it quite like that, as us excusing too much, but I guess now that you mention it,
Mm.
I can see that. I can see that.
But
I
I
can
don't
see.
want that to be interpreted as like throwing
Mhm.
blame at people or
Right.
in people or not being disappointed. It's not meant that way. It's just meant that I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah,
I've experienced it with family members
yeah.
that have less than optimal. I'm not even
There's
talking
some
about
optimal.
optical care, but like not having compassionate care. And I
Mm-hmm.
just don't think
Mm-hmm.
I would
Mm-hmm.
I would just like that not to be okay in nursing. Mm.
I get that. I get that. But now you are you're an S executive, which means you are in the C-suites. So what in advocating for nursing and nurses in those areas, what is the biggest challenge?
Well, first of all, I have retired from
Okay.
my chief nursing officer role. So I put retired in quotes because although I'm not in a formal CNO role for the last few months, I am very active with lots in nursing. And so I just wanted to correct
Yeah.
that so that nobody thinks I'm actively in a CNO role now, but I was very recently. I'm still in recovery. So in terms of advocating, your question was what is like the challenge when advocating
Yeah.
for nurses?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, I mean, honestly, in my CNO role, my role as advocate for nurses and patients, I took more seriously than anything else. Like that, I tended to gear my role and my response to an advocacy type response. Like as a C-suite person, I think that is critical in leadership practice, especially for nurses, because I'm partial to nurses. But the other challenge was that it can't be just about nurses. When you're in the C-suite, if you're just focusing on nursing, everybody else is like, oh, the nurses always want everything, they always get everything. Like there's like it's and now is that justified? Yeah, because who else is with the patients all that time? Who else is doing the life and death as
Yeah.
much as nurses? So, I mean, it is, and nurses, and I always struggled with this, especially in advocacy work. Nurses are proxies for the patients, honestly. What nurses are asking for is what makes for better patient care. So nurses are really proxy for patients. So I had to kind of make that connection when advocating often. And when you're advocating just for nurses, that you have to really advocate broader, like looking at
Yeah.
impact on the whole organization. So to say, well, nurses need a 10% raise, well, what about everybody else? Or nurses have to have flexible scheduling, or what about everybody else? And you know, so whatever you're advocating for, you have to think about impact bigger than nursing. And you also have to think about, you know, what's the return on investment? Like that's a big part of advocacy. You have to be able to verbalize that. And then the other thing is when advocating is you have to think of all the stakeholders for whatever the issue is. Like I made a big deal once, like we had a policy that nurses could not, or anybody for that matter, could not have water at the nurse's station, could not have water in their pockets. Like you were not allowed to drink or eat. And I understood eating, but you could not drink in public, like at the nurse's station or
Yeah.
anywhere near patients. And I thought, like, where did that come from? Is that like an OSHA rule? Like, where did that? So I'm looking up OSHA rules. I'm looking at, and there was no such rule that you could not have water. So I advocated for a change in the policy so that water was allowed at the nurse's station. It had to be in a closed container. It
Yeah.
can't be anything open, but that water was allowed. And it took a while, but I had a lot of stakeholders to get through. I had to get through the regulatory people and the accrediting people and the infection control people and the doctors and the C-suite. You know, there was like multiple stakeholders to get through, but everybody has to be lined up, or whatever you're advocating for, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. 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 I can see that that's an uphill walk. So but given where we are now, because you have been a nurse for a long time, and so have I. And what I have seen is that much has changed in a very short time. Nursing has always been evolving, but it blew up in the last 5 to 10 years. So what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10? What would you like to see happen?
Hmm.
How do you think it's going to look?
Oh, well, let me just clear off my crystal ball. So I think, I have a lot of hopes, honestly. It's all hope, and some of it I'm working towards with my advocacy work, but
Yeah.
a lot of it is hope. And I think some of the blow up has been in terms of lack of diversity, lack of health equity, lack of voice
Mhm.
at the table. And I hope all of that changes, and that the racial disparities that have plagued nursing disappear, that we are recognized for how we make a difference in health equity across the whole continuum of care, that nurses are respected for their contributions, that there's like shared decision making everywhere, that nurses are part of decisions. I mean, the other thing that's blown up is well-being, and I kind of hope that it's not an issue anymore, that it's just like given that our work environments and our leaders and our organizations focus on, it's not even a focus anymore, it's just a way of being, it's organizational culture, that if it's not aligned with well-being, then it's not going to be.
Exactly.
So I kind of hope that. The other thing that's blown up, my God, now you have me started, is technology.
Yes.
And I think it is primarily all good. Like, I have seen technology, vital signs automatically going into the electronic record without
Directly.
transcription. And
Mhm.
even some virtual nursing at the last hospital that I worked, there was a pilot where for admissions and discharges, the nurse on the floor could kind of beam in a nurse in the virtual care center who
Yes.
could do the admission. I mean, obviously not the physical assessment,
No.
but
Mhm.
could do the discharge teaching. And it so helped the nurses, because all that ADT activity always takes so much time. And then you have to spend such a long time admitting or discharging somebody that the rest of your patient load is getting neglected.
Yeah.
And to have
Mhm.
somebody help you with that. So it was just an example of how technology really helps workload. I mean, there is that negative side in terms of the electronic medical
Yeah.
record is just laden with
Mhm.
checkboxes and
And
screens, and I mean, it's just
yes.
ridiculous
Yes.
what the expectations for documentation are. But that's all because of accreditation standards and regulatory standards, and
Mhm.
lawyers who legal
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
cases, and we've seen the power of documentation over and over and over again, whether you're involved in a lawsuit or in a survey or with a patient's family
Yeah.
who's asking a question. That documentation isn't there, then you are, as my mother would say, like up a creek without a paddle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe
Yeah.
that'll get better. I hope it does. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I could probably go on. I guess advanced practice nursing, we haven't talked about that at all, but I would hope in 10 years that advanced practice nursing, I mean, I think it's growing and growing and growing and becoming more and more important in
Mhm.
primary care, and even in acute care, and certainly in
Mhm.
subacute and long-term care.
And
So
yeah.
I hope to see that grow, and just become stronger and stronger.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I think we're beginning to find our feet and be a voice. The younger nurses that I see coming along and definitely not putting up with the kinds of things that we put up with.
Yeah, it's a good
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah,
Good. I'm good. They're not putting up with it. And I think that's great.
I like it. I like it. I like it. What advice though would you give to someone who wants to be a nurse? Because these days especially, they're kind of like, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to do this, but I don't know anymore." What would you say?
Oh, do it, do it. Like, once you get in and start practicing, the rewards are, I mean, it's a lucrative career, not for nothing. Well, I live in New York City, so I'm a little biased because the salaries here are higher, except for California, I think might be higher than anywhere else, but it's pretty, it's like steady. And from a career point of view, you can find a job and you can make money, and the opportunities are endless. I mean, literally endless as a nurse. You could do like me, go into education and then into management. There's all the different clinical specialties. You could be a quality nurse, you could be a school nurse, you could be a cruise nurse. I mean, it's just the opportunities are endless.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, do it. Like, if you
Yeah.
can't find something you like in nursing, then I don't know. I don't know if you'll ever, you can't, maybe then you just don't like people. Like, you have to like people
Yeah.
to be a good nurse and relationships, but otherwise,
You
do
see,
it.
the thing is that many people, including nurses, I don't think understand just how vast it is and how much opportunity there is. I mean, for most of my career, I don't think I quite grasped just how big it is. And every time I think that I know, it turns out that I don't. It turns out that it's bigger than I think it is. And so I think if you're coming into it, because typically when you tell people you're a nurse, they get the picture of you in the hospital in some kind of institutional setting. But the other bigger parts of it, they don't really see. Or, I remember saying something to someone about working from home, and how can you work from home? So
Well,
people
that's
need to be,
another option. I mean, there are work from home
yeah,
options,
yeah,
and for insurance companies, or doing triage even.
yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot.
There's a lot. There's a lot. You can work if there's an industry you can think of, there's a space for a nurse in that. Space for a nurse in it.
Yeah.
Except perhaps beekeeping. That may not be.
Okay.
So you touched a bit about on well-being though, and I wanted to ask you, we talk a lot about self-care. What does it mean to you?
Well, it's different for everybody. And,
Mhm.
I have a mantra that self-care is not selfish. And for the last 3 or 4 organizations, I have made sure that that is part of our culture for
Yeah,
nursing department. But for me, self-care is going to a yoga class minimally once a week. Family time to me is honestly
yeah,
self-care. I like to listen to books in the car, so listening to books while I'm driving to me is self-care. I can have a horrible day at work, and then
yeah,
I get in the car and I'm listening to this great book, and it's all behind me.
yeah,
So it's a self-care thing. So it depends. Everybody's different.
yeah, yeah. And that's why I ask it, because it's so different for everyone. And we often don't give it enough thought or articulate examine exactly what it means to us. We kind of follow what it means to someone else. And that does not satisfy you.
Mm, true.
So one last question. One last question. I've been asking for these words. If you could articulate the most essential quality of a nurse in just one word, what would that word be?
Hmm. I'm thinking of two.
I'll take
I
two.
have to decide which one, because I believe in this is going to become a whole answer now. I believe in like the art and science of nursing, and it's
Mm-hmm,
both. So
mm-hmm.
it's the heart and the brain. It's both. So it's caring is the art, and knowledge is the science. So maybe if I put those words together, I would have knowledgeable caring.
That sounds like a plan.
Mm.
Knowledgeable caring. Knowledgeable caring. I was saying that I started asking for these words because I recognize that I can, identify nurses somehow without being told. Not every time, but you see someone, and that person is a nurse. And I started to wonder about it. And what are we seeing? And I've gotten all of these various words, and as I think about each one, each one of them really does fit. Each one of them fits. I see compassion and empathy and humanistic and intelligent and all kinds of things. And they all do fit, and they all do fit.
Well, those words that you said are kind of similar, humanistic and intelligent. That's knowledge and care, like we're holistic and smart.
Yeah. A whole lot of, but it tells me how each of us, how we see ourselves and how we see where we are, what brings us to this. Is there, before we go, is there a little something you'd like to leave us with?
Oh no, you dug deep into my brain right now. I don't think there's anything left that we haven't talked about.
All right. Well, thank you so very, very much for this. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you. And I enjoyed the conversation 1000%.
Thank you.